Welcome to Compact History from compacthistories.com, where we explore the stories, events, and moments that shape the world. In short, bite-sized episodes. This is episode 109, The History of Cryptography. Cryptography, the art of hiding information, is nearly as old as writing itself. Long before algorithms, computers, or code-breaking machines, ancient civilizations were already devising ingenious ways to conceal messages. At its core, cryptography emerged from a simple human impulse: the need for privacy, protection, and power. One of the earliest known examples comes from ancient Egypt. Inscriptions dating back over 4,000 years show the use of non-standard hieroglyphs in tombs. What might be considered decorative at first glance may also represent early attempts at obfuscation. While these weren't complex ciphers as we understand them today, they were symbolic of the desire to limit access to sacred or sensitive information. Further east, the Mesopotamians showed more deliberate cryptographic intent. A clay tablet from around 1500 BCE contains a recipe for a form of pottery glaze, written using a form of encipherment to keep the technique secret. This suggests early examples of cryptography being used not for state secrets or military use, but to guard commercial knowledge, a trend that would echo across centuries. The Hebrew Bible, too, contains an example of simple substitution. The Atbash cipher, where the alphabet is reversed, A becomes Z, B becomes Y, and so on, is used in several places, including the Book of Jeremiah. Though elementary, this method introduced one of the oldest known examples of alphabetic substitution, a key principle that would evolve dramatically over time. In India, cryptography found a place in the political and espionage practices of ancient kingdoms. The Arthashastra, a 4th century BCE Sanskrit treatise attributed to the strategist Kautilya, also known as Chanakya, includes detailed instructions on the use of secret agents and coded messages. These early texts reflect a sophisticated understanding of information control within governance and warfare. Meanwhile, the Greeks used rudimentary techniques such as the cytal, a cylindrical tool used by the Spartans to encode messages. A strip of parchment was wound around a rod, and the message was written across the spirals. Once unwound, it appeared as gibberish until it was rewrapped around a rod of the same diameter. These early systems were basic by modern standards, but they laid the groundwork for thousands of years of cryptographic development. In every corner of the ancient world, the act of disguising messages reflected not just tactical necessity, but also an evolving awareness of the value of information and the dangers of letting it fall into the wrong hands. As ancient societies evolved, so too did their methods of concealing information. The classical world, particularly ancient Greece and Rome, ushered in an era where cryptography matured beyond basic obfuscation into more structured, repeatable systems of encryption. It was in this period that cryptography began to acquire a tactical and strategic significance, particularly in matters of war and diplomacy. Perhaps the most well-known figure associated with early classical cryptography is Julius Caesar. His name lives on in the Caesar cipher, a simple but effective substitution method where each letter in the plaintext is shifted a fixed number of places down the alphabet. For example, with a shift of 3, A becomes D, B becomes E, and so on. The cipher is easy to implement, but was remarkably effective at the time due to the general illiteracy of the population and the lack of cryptanalytic tools. Though rudimentary by modern standards, the Caesar cipher introduced several important cryptographic concepts. The idea of a key, in this case, the number of letters shifted, the relationship between plaintext and ciphertext, and the notion of reversible encoding, each a building block of modern cryptographic systems. Variations of the Caesar cipher were used extensively by Roman military commanders to transmit battlefield commands and intelligence, proving its value in strategic communications. In Greece, cryptography was also being developed and deployed. The aforementioned cytail device, used by the Spartans, may seem low-tech today, but it was an early form of a transposition cipher, one in which the positions of letters are shifted according to a specific system rather than replacing them. The strength of this method lies in the secrecy of the rod's diameter. Only someone with the correct matching cylinder could read the message. Outside of Greece and Rome, cryptographic thinking continued to evolve. Arab scholars during the Islamic Golden Age, which began just after the fall of Rome but continued classical traditions, would eventually make significant contributions to cryptanalysis. But even before then, classical civilizations began to understand that secrecy alone wasn't enough. Methods needed to be robust against interception. The use of ciphers in classical times wasn't limited to warfare. Secret messages appeared in love letters, religious texts, and political correspondence. Even philosophers like Plutarch and Polybius documented various techniques of encoding information, including the Polybius square, a grid-based cipher that converted letters into pairs of numbers. By the end of the classical period, cryptography had moved from mystical or ornamental use into a practical tool, an essential aspect of communication in an increasingly complex and interconnected world. The Islamic Golden Age, spanning roughly from the 8th to the 13th century, marked a pivotal era in the evolution of cryptography, not only for the refinement of encryption methods, but also for the birth of cryptanalysis, the art of breaking codes. While earlier civilizations had focused mainly on hiding messages, scholars of the Islamic world took a more analytical approach, studying how such messages could be uncovered. One of the most important figures in this era was Al-Kindi, a 9th-century Arab polymath whose contributions to mathematics, philosophy, and science extended deeply into the realm of cryptography. Al-Kindi authored a treatise titled On Deciphering Cryptographic Messages, which is considered the first known text on cryptanalysis. In it, he outlined a method that would change the field forever: frequency analysis. Frequency analysis was based on the observation that, in any given language, certain letters appear more frequently than others. For instance, in Arabic, the letter alif occurs more often than many others. By studying a ciphertext and comparing the frequency of each symbol to known frequencies in the target language, Al-Kindi demonstrated how to deduce the substitution pattern used in a cipher. This was revolutionary. For the first time, encrypted messages could be systematically decrypted without prior knowledge of the key. The development of cryptanalysis also prompted the advancement of more sophisticated ciphers. Simple monoalphabetic substitution, where one letter is always replaced with the same symbol, was no longer secure. As a result, polymorphic systems and polyalphabetic ciphers began to emerge, with attempts made to alter the ciphering rules mid-message to confuse codebreakers. Beyond Al-Kindi, Islamic scholars continued to refine cryptographic practices. The Abbasid Caliphate, which fostered an environment of intellectual inquiry, saw court officials, diplomats, and military leaders using encryption for state communications. Manuals on secret writing became part of bureaucratic and military training. The techniques were practical, applied, and constantly evolving in response to threats. Notably, the use of codebooks began to gain traction. These listed common words or phrases alongside their encrypted equivalents, reducing the need to encrypt every individual letter. Codebooks made messages quicker to write and read, but created new security risks. If captured, an entire codebook could compromise hundreds of messages. The legacy of the Islamic Golden Age in cryptography is profound. Not only did it lay the foundations for analytical decryption, But it also sparked a kind of arms race between cryptographers and cryptanalysts that continues to this day. In fact, many techniques pioneered during this period remained in use for centuries, a testament to the intellectual achievements of scholars like Al-Kindi and the importance of cryptographic study in statecraft and diplomacy. The Renaissance era, spanning the 14th to the 17th centuries, was a time of remarkable intellectual, political, and technological change across Europe. As monarchs and states jostled for power, influence, and information, cryptography moved from the realm of scholars and mystics into the very heart of government. For the first time, secret writing became a cornerstone of statecraft, fueled by espionage, diplomacy, and religious conflict. One of the most influential developments during this period was the widespread use of cipher diplomacy, where encrypted correspondence was routinely used by ambassadors, monarchs, and secret agents. Letters between European courts were no longer composed in plain language. Encryption became essential to protect sensitive negotiations, military movements, and political alliances from interception. With every court in Europe essentially playing a high-stakes game of chess, a well-timed deciphered message could shift the balance of power. The ciphers themselves became more advanced than those of previous centuries. The monoalphabetic substitution cipher, while still in use, was increasingly vulnerable to the growing application of frequency analysis. As a response, polyalphabetic ciphers emerged as a new standard. These used multiple substitution alphabets to obscure letter frequencies, rendering frequency analysis far more difficult. The most famous of these was the Vigenère cipher, named after the French diplomat Blaise de Vigenère, although similar systems had been described earlier by Italian cryptologist Giovan Battista Belasso. The Vigenère cipher used a keyword to shift the alphabet with each successive letter of the message. This made it far more secure than previous methods and earned it a reputation as le chiffre indéchiffrable, the indecipherable cipher. In reality, it wasn't unbreakable, but it was considerably harder to crack using the tools of the time. Meanwhile, the art of manual cryptanalysis continued to evolve. Skilled codebreakers, often working for monarchs or religious authorities, became invaluable. In England, Thomas Philippes, a linguist and cryptanalyst working for spymaster Sir Francis Walsingham, played a crucial role in uncovering the Babington Plot, a Catholic conspiracy to assassinate Queen Elizabeth I and replace her with Mary, Queen of Scots. Philippes intercepted and decoded encrypted letters, providing evidence that led to Mary's execution. It was one of the earliest examples of cryptography directly influencing the outcome of a major political event. Elsewhere, Cardinal Richelieu in France used cryptography to strengthen royal power and undermine rivals, while in the Vatican, encryption was used to protect papal correspondence during times of religious upheaval. The 30 Years' War, the Reformation, and the rise of nation-states all drove the demand for increasingly complex codes and ciphers. By the end of the Renaissance, cryptography had become institutionalized. European powers began creating dedicated cipher offices and trained officials who were responsible for encoding and decoding state communications. The development of more efficient cipher tools, like cipher disks and cipher tables, helped streamline the process, ensuring secrecy could keep pace with the demands of fast-moving diplomacy. In short, the Renaissance transformed cryptography from an academic exercise into a vital tool of realpolitik. As empires expanded and the web of international diplomacy became ever more entangled, cryptographic skill became a matter not just of strategy, but of survival. The dawn of the 20th century brought with it not just industrialization and global conflict, but a dramatic shift in the scale and complexity of cryptography. What had previously been the domain of pen, paper, and clever linguists was now being revolutionized by mechanization, with machines designed to encrypt and decrypt messages faster and more securely than ever before. This era marked the beginning of the cryptographic arms race as nations began to invest heavily in outsmarting one another's codes. The First World War was a turning point. Telegraphy and radio became vital for battlefield communication, but their signals could be intercepted with ease. This forced both sides to create and break codes at an industrial scale. The Germans used complex manual systems like the ADFGVX cipher, a cipher that used a polybius square combined with columnar transposition. Though considered highly secure at the time, it was eventually cracked by French cryptanalyst Georges Painvin, whose success directly impacted battlefield outcomes. It was during the Second World War, however, that cryptography became truly central to global warfare. Nations established entire departments dedicated to code-breaking and cipher design. The most infamous cipher machine of the period was the German Enigma machine, used to encrypt military communications. Although Enigma was initially thought unbreakable due to its vast number of settings, its security ultimately depended on secrecy, and that secrecy was compromised. A team of Polish cryptanalysts first made headway in breaking early versions of Enigma in the 1930s, but the most famous breakthroughs came from Bletchley Park in Britain. Led by pioneers like Alan Turing, British mathematicians and linguists created machines like the Bombay, which could decipher Enigma messages faster than any human. The intelligence gleaned from these intercepted and decoded messages, codenamed Ultra, is credited with shortening the war by several years and saving countless lives. On the Axis side, the Japanese also used complex encryption systems, most notably the Purple Cipher. American cryptographers working at the U.S. Army's Signal Intelligence Service, including William Friedman, cracked Purple before the attack on Pearl Harbor, allowing the Allies to intercept and understand Japan's diplomatic traffic for much of the war. As code-breaking became increasingly technical, electromechanical, and eventually electronic systems came into play. Machines like the American Cigaba or British Typex offered higher levels of security than earlier ciphers. These innovations not only protected sensitive information, but also laid the groundwork for modern computing. The demands of wartime cryptanalysis drove the development of the first programmable digital computers, including Colossus, arguably the world's first digital electronic computer. But this arms race didn't end with victory parades. After World War II, cryptography shifted from the battlefield to the theater of geopolitics. The Cold War became an extended cryptographic duel between the NSA in the United States and the KGB and GRU in the Soviet Union. Signals intelligence, SIGINT, and code-breaking operations were classified at the highest levels. Encryption now extended to satellite communications, nuclear command and control systems, and espionage operations around the world. Both sides employed mathematicians, linguists, engineers, and spies in their battle to keep secrets safe or expose them. Vast resources were devoted to the development of secure communications and the breaking of foreign systems. In some cases, breakthroughs were achieved not by mathematical genius, but by human error or espionage, such as the US discovering Soviet ciphers via spies like Oleg Penkovsky, or the British uncovering Soviet encryption weaknesses through defectors. This period also saw the beginning of electronic surveillance as we know it today. Massive listening stations like GCHQ in the UK and Echelon facilities around the world intercepted and analysed global communications traffic. Encryption and decryption had become not only tools of war, but also instruments of diplomacy, intelligence, and ideological warfare. By the mid-20th century, cryptography was no longer optional. It was a requirement for every serious power. The The mechanized era had turned it into a science of logic, probability, and speed. And as the Cold War intensified, so too did the stakes, setting the stage for the next great leap, the digital revolution. With the rise of computers in the latter half of the 20th century, cryptography underwent another profound transformation, this time from a closely guarded tool of governments and militaries to a foundational technology underpinning our digital lives. What had once been the secret language of spies and soldiers became essential for anyone with a smartphone, a bank account, or an internet connection. The arrival of digital computing changed the rules. Classical ciphers, no matter how clever, were not designed for the raw processing power of modern machines. Encryption needed to be stronger, more scalable, and fast enough to keep up with the demands of a global, interconnected world. This shift began in earnest in the 1970s, a decade that saw some of the most critical cryptographic breakthroughs in history. One of the most significant was the development of public key cryptography, introduced in 1976 by Whitfield Diffie and Martin Hellman. Until then, secure communication required both parties to share a secret key, a logistical nightmare in many scenarios. Public key encryption solved this by using two keys, a public key to encrypt a message and a private key to decrypt it. This innovation revolutionized secure communication, making it possible for anyone to send encrypted messages without ever having met the recipient. Building on this concept, RSA encryption, named after inventors Rivest, Shamir, and Adelman, became the standard for secure online data transfer. Its strength lies in the difficulty of factoring large prime numbers, a problem that is computationally demanding even for modern computers. To this day, RSA and its descendants remain the backbone of online security, from emails to credit card transactions. As the Internet matured, cryptography moved into the mainstream. The Secure Sockets Layer, SSL, and later Transport Layer Security, TLS, protocols were developed to secure web traffic, enabling the little padlock icon that appears in browsers during encrypted sessions. From shopping online to logging into your bank, cryptography has become the silent guardian of everyday interactions. Governments, meanwhile, found themselves in a new kind of arms race, not just against one another, but against private individuals and even their own citizens. The 1990s saw fierce debates over the right to privacy versus national security. One of the most notorious flashpoints was the Clipper chip, a US government proposal for a chip that would allow law enforcement access to encrypted communications. It was met with public backlash and ultimately abandoned, but it sparked an ongoing debate that still rages today. With the explosion of smartphones and cloud computing in the 21st century, cryptography became omnipresent. End-to-end encryption, where only the communicating users can read the messages, became a standard feature in messaging apps like WhatsApp and Signal. Meanwhile, encrypted storage, VPNs, and password managers became routine tools for privacy-conscious users. In parallel, blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies brought cryptographic principles to finance. Bitcoin, created in 2009 by the pseudonymous Satoshi Nakamoto, uses cryptographic hash functions and public key signatures to create a decentralized and secure digital currency. This sparked a revolution not only in how we think about money, but in how we trust data and decentralized networks. But as our reliance on cryptography grew, so did the threats. Cybercriminals, hackers, and hostile state actors constantly probe for weaknesses in encryption systems. The field of quantum computing looms on the horizon, with the potential to render current cryptographic methods obsolete by breaking them in mere seconds. In response, researchers are racing to develop post-quantum cryptography, designing algorithms that can withstand the computing power of tomorrow. Today, cryptography sits at the heart of global infrastructure. It secures international banking networks, guards the secrets of governments and corporations, and enables private communication across borders. But it also raises ethical questions. Who should have access to encrypted data? Should governments be able to compel companies to create backdoors? How do we balance privacy, security, and freedom in a digital world? As we move deeper into the information age, cryptography is no longer a niche science. It's a public issue. From civil liberties to cyber warfare, from personal privacy to national defense, cryptography is the thread that holds together the digital fabric of modern life. And its story is far from over. That brings us to the end of this episode of Compact History, part of the Compact Histories network. If you enjoyed it, please follow or subscribe wherever you're listening so you don't miss any future episodes, and consider leaving a rating or review, as it really helps new listeners find the show. You can find more episodes at compacthistory.com, where you can also explore our other podcasts covering biographies, warfare, disasters, mysteries, and true crime. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Pinterest. Finally, please consider supporting the show directly by buying us a coffee. Head on over to compacthistories.com/historycoffee to see how. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.